The story of the people of Manzanar is one that will live on forever. It all began when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, which led to the United States entering into World War II and changed the lives of 120,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry living in the United States. The attack on Pearl Harbor led to racial prejudices and the fear of sabotage and espionage from Japanese Americans within the government, military, news, media, and public.
Then, in 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an order allowing the military to establish areas and to remove anyone who might threaten the war effort from those areas. Without due process, the government gave everyone of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast only a couple days to decide what to do with their houses, farms, businesses, and other possessions.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our West Coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry. Behind them, they left shops and homes they had occupied for many years. The Army provided housing and plenty of healthful, nourishing food for all. The residents of the new community set about developing a way of life as nearly normal as possible. They held church services. They issued their own newspaper, organized nursery schools, and some made camouflage nets for the United States Army. They made a rough beginning at self-government, for while the Army would guard the outer limits of each area, community life and security within were largely up to the Japanese themselves. They immediately saw the need for developing civic leaders. This brief picture is actually the prologue to a story that is yet to be told. The full story will begin to unfold when the raw lands of the desert turn green, when all adult hands are at productive work on public lands or in private employment. It will be fully told only when circumstances permit the loyal American citizens once again to enjoy the freedom we in this country cherish, and when the disloyal, we hope, have left this country for good. In the meantime, we are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation. We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. And we won't change this fundamental decency no matter what our enemies do. But of course, we hope most earnestly that our example will influence the Axis powers in their treatment of Americans who fall into their hands.
Many families sold their belongings at a significant loss. Some people rented their properties to neighbors. Others left possessions with friends or religious groups. Some abandoned their property. They did not know where they were going or for how long. Each family was assigned an identification number and loaded into cars, buses, trucks, and trains, only taking what they could carry.
All internees were given the chance to sign loyalty oaths and leave the camps if they had sponsors. The oaths asked two questions. Would you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States, and would you serve in the military of the United States? 86% of the population answered the loyalty questionnaire positively. Many of the younger people and those fluent in English were able to leave for jobs in schools in the Midwest and East. But some 1,900 internees refused to answer or answered no, and were then transferred to Tule Lake from 1943 to 1944.
As the war progressed, the government allowed Japanese to join the military. 174 men from Manzanar were drafted directly into armed forces. Their parents wore blue stars for sons in the military and gold ones for those who died in combat.
In July, Dr. Morris E. Oppler, an anthropologist from Cornell University, New York, arrived at Manzanar and served as a social science analyst at the camp until November 1944. Dr. Morris lived in the barracks among the internees and studied the population so he could give advice to the administration on the center's policies and rules. The reports provided a good source of information in understanding the Japanese American communities, cultures, and attitudes.
People did their best to make the surroundings more attractive. They added walkways, gardens, and small ponds around the barracks. The hospital even had an elaborate garden with a pond, a stream, rock gardens, and other landscape features. Nearly every residential block had its own volleyball or basketball court, and some even had playground equipment. After many Supreme Court meetings in 1945, Japanese American citizens that showed loyalty and support to America were allowed to return to the West. It was not until 1946 that the last internment camp was closed down. All the people whose land had been lost were reimbursed for their losses. In 1988, each person held in these internment camps were given $20,000 each due to the violation of their liberties. It was estimated that about 73,000 received this money. The stories of the people at Manzanar will live on forever in our hearts, continuing to be remembered for generations to come.
From Cornell University, New York, arrived at Manzanar and served as a social science analyst at the camp until November 1944. Dr. Morris lived in the